Hi everyone, welcome to the second video in the series of tutorials I'm going to be making in regards to sound design. And in this particular one, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you some devices that might not be so apparent, or some devices that maybe some of you guys have not used before, but they have got loads of utility. And as you can see here, I'm with my mate Adam Elemental, who runs his own company called Internal Studio. So I'm very glad to have him here. And so I'm going to get started with this tutorial, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And I wanted to really show you what the capabilities of Impulse, which is the device I'm going to be working with, truly are. And I can honestly say that Impulse is absolutely bonkers. It's so good. So let's just go over to my screen. Cool. So I've got just a quick example so you can hear how this would work in kind of like in context. And what I've done is basically I'm using Impulse as a way to trigger a sample, but there's a few interesting kind of changes and things that I've done to it. And today I actually decided to do something that sounds a bit more kind of techno-y or housey sounding, simply because it's just a lot easier to demonstrate in this particular case. If I press play, you should be able to hear the effect that Impulse is having on this particular sound. Cool. So if I solo Impulse just so you can hear it, I want you to notice one thing. Listen to this sound.
It's changing.
Yeah? You want it to change even more? Let's change it even more. So every note is ever so slightly different. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
And that can be a really interesting way to sort of add movement to something that was static. And I think like nowadays in music production, I think that's really important because we've got incredible tools to make music. And I think it's like even easier nowadays to make music that sounds really organic, even though you're like using electronic instruments to make the music with. I think it's 100%. I think that's where we head into. We head into like a much more organic music making in terms of like expression, but also we're moving towards like sounds that they sound close to like acoustic sounds, if that makes sense, right? Like the same way that you would if you were to listen to a guitar and you hear the same riff over and over and over, even though you're hearing the same riff every time you hear it, it's just ever so slightly different because it's an acoustic instrument, right? So the same thing can be applied with electronic music as well, and with sounds that we create with synths or with something like Impulse. So I'm going to show you how to go about this. And the key to this sound is basically two aspects that you guys might have not looked into. So let me just reset it so you can see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial in some notes. Let me just go into the notes section and just draw them in. You can see that's the sample, right? The original sample is just a chord, really quite a simple sound. Let me just quickly show you here. So this is the original sample I was using. So it's not my favorite sound, but actually it kind of works in the context of this tutorial. So if I press play, you're going to hear that sound is just like, it's going to be the same all the time now. Right? So the main key aspects for Impulse, and one of the things that Impulse is extremely powerful for, is obviously it's got built-in time stretch. But not only time stretch in the sample, we can also expand it, but we can also compress it, so we can make the sample half the length, right? So it sounds a little bit tighter. So really cool. But we also have got a built-in filter, we got built-in distortion, as you can see here. But you can see that below these parameters, one thing that's really interesting is the fact that the velocity can be mapped to multiple parameters. And you can see that the velocity can be mapped to the transposition, or it can be mapped to the filter frequency, as you can see here, but also can be mapped to volume. By default, the velocity would be mapped to volume, but that's not what we want. So I actually took that down to nothing, right? But what we can do now is I can say, okay, velocity mapped to filter frequency. So if we press play now, you can see like if I play around with the velocity values here, every note will sound different based on the velocities that we dial in, right? So that's really bright and that's more mellow, and that can be really cool, right? Because when we hear it, it sounds a little bit more dynamic. So if we listen to just notes now,
we can add one more note at the end of the bar.
You reckon?
Yeah.
Let's add one more in there. Let's just switch to the notes. There you go. Maybe here.
Yeah.
That's cool, right? Now we've got the beat, obviously. That's cool, right? But also,
Yeah.
there's another thing that's really interesting, and it's the fact that we can randomize. Also, besides using the velocity, we can apply randomization to the filter frequency if you want it. So we got a random control. So it's subtle, but like the tonality of the sound keeps changing constantly.
Remember you showed me something earlier where you could see the amount of random.
Exactly. There's two ways that you can apply random.
Okay, so there's two different ways you can do it. Okay, got
so
it.
you can do it directly with an impulse, because impulse has got a random it's got randomness that you can apply to the filter frequency. We can also randomize the pitch, which is a bit mental, but sometimes can be an interesting thing, especially if you're looking to create something that deviate, like the pitch kind of shifts even a little bit. It just makes it sound a little bit more unstable, you know. So if you're looking to create something that sounds like lo-fi house or anything like that, could be really cool.
Okay.
But also the other mode I was showing Adam earlier is this. Like when you are inside the note view, if you select all the notes, you can see that we got the velocity values here at the bottom. If I go over to the notes section here on this tab, you can see that we got this thing called velocity range. And what the velocity range does is that you can see as I click on it and drag it up and down, it means that the velocity can be randomized, or Ableton will randomize the velocity based on the original value and the highest value that we set here. You can even see that we can drag them down just by clicking as well. You see, so that can be also quite interesting. And we can do it on a per note basis as well. So I can go to that note and I can be okay.
Insane. On
That's
a per note basis as well. Right.
Yeah, so you can be okay. That's going to be like crazy.
So cool.
That one is going to be a little bit more stable, but that's going to go the opposite direction.
Wow.
Right, and then I can go to the last note here and I can be okay. That's going to be like really crazy, but this one here is going to be stable. So there's one note maybe that's just going to be the same all the time, but everything else is just constantly shifting. So it's really cool.
Endless variation of. That's great. You can just set up what starts as a simple loop and then set up the variation, and then you can just listen back.
Yeah, needless to say, right? Like, because we can load up the same sample again on another cell. We got endless. I mean, you know, we got 8 cells, so we can do really complex stuff if we truly want it. Even using the same sample, obviously we can load in any other samples and start creating some interesting things. But with this one here, it's just straightforward. So I'm just going to add it maybe like on the slightly more random like that. And maybe I'm just going to increase the decay so it lasts a little bit longer. And that's the sample. Right, let's add maybe a little bit more crunch. Like that. So now we got the original beat, which is the original section, which is that. But then I'm adding this other sample as well, which is just playing this on top. And of course you can randomize this if you want it. So we can, again, velocity, or we can randomize the filter completely.
Great. Yeah.
So it's like hypnotic almost, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
And you can, you can apply. You can also do some interesting things, and this is the last thing I'll show you guys just briefly. You can obviously automate this amount of randomization. So, for example, you could make this sequence and then just have like certain notes that they will just randomly change, right? So, for example, I can go over to my envelopes, and I already selected here, as you can see, I already selected the random amount for the transposition. So that means that, for example, I could have certain notes, maybe like this note here in the middle. That note is constantly going to be changing in pitch, and that way you're not only just randomizing the velocity, but you could also randomize the pitch of the note. So you can have some really interesting sort of permutations of the original melody. Kind of like, it's just more organic sounding, right? There you go. We can make it a little bit more subtle.
Could you also fix that to a scale? So it's not
not with an impulse. Yeah, it's not as easy to do.
Right.
Because it's playing around with, and basically I'm playing around with the random
Got
here.
it. Okay, so you don't have that control where you can like quantize it to a certain scale.
No, as far as I'm aware, I don't know if there's a way to do this within impulse. Obviously, with other devices
you might need
can.
Max for Live involved to do
exactly.
that sort of thing. Right. Okay.
Exactly. But anyway, just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview, guys, on how creative you can get really with the tools within Ableton. And especially something like Impulse. I think like many producers hardly ever use Impulse. I mean, I don't know, like when I first got Ableton, maybe I just went straight into drum racks and I never really touched Impulse, but you can actually see that Impulse can be really powerful as well to create some interesting sequences that will be a nightmare to do in simpler, the stuff I'm doing here will take way longer to do.
Okay.
Right. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I just wanted to share some extra nuggets of knowledge. Thanks so much for Adam. Thanks so much for being here. Much appreciated, man.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Hector.
No worries. And in the meantime, enjoy the tutorial, and any questions or comments, just reply to the video. All right, take care, guys. See you soon.